in the cereal aisle of a suburban grocery store on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. That sound shattered the mundane rhythm of shoppers pushing carts and scanning price tags. 72-year-old Samuel Washington, Bronze Star recipient, father of 3, husband of 48 years, stumbled backward, his weathered hand rising instinctively to his burning cheek. The man who'd just slapped him stood there, chest puffed out, fist still clenched. Derek Hutchins had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had no idea the frail old man he'd just humiliated was the father of the Deputy Director of Homeland Security. He had no idea this moment was being recorded by a dozen phones, about to go viral and change both their lives forever. All Derek knew was that he was angry, and he thought he could get away with it. He was wrong. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. The slap echoed through the grocery store like a gunshot. Samuel Washington, 72 years old, stumbled backward into the cereal aisle, his hand instinctively rising to his burning cheek. The shopping basket he'd been holding clattered to the floor, scattering apples and a carton of milk across the polished linoleum. Around him, other shoppers froze in place, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they witnessed what had just happened. "That's what you people get for not watching where you're going," sneered Derek Hutchins, a thick-necked man in his early 40s whose face was flushed red with anger. He stood there, chest puffed out, his fist still clenched from the blow he'd just delivered. Samuel touched his face gently, feeling the heat radiating from where Derek's palm had connected. His eyes watered, not from pain, but from the stunning humiliation of it all. In 72 years of life, including 2 tours in Vietnam and decades working as a postal carrier, no one had ever struck him like this. Not in public. Not with such casual cruelty. I apologized," Samuel said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "My cart bumped yours by accident. I already said I was sorry." "Your sorry doesn't cut it, old man," Derek spat, taking a step closer. He was easily 6 inches taller than Samuel, and at least 50 pounds heavier, most of it bulk from years of construction work. "You scratched my new watch when your cart hit me. Do you know how much this cost? More than you probably make in a month from whatever government check you're living on." A woman nearby gasped and pulled her young daughter away from the scene. Another shopper had already pulled out his phone, clearly recording. But no one intervened. No one stepped between them. Samuel recognized the look in their eyes, the same look he'd seen so many times before in his life, a mixture of discomfort, pity, and the desperate hope that they wouldn't have to get involved. Samuel slowly bent down to retrieve his shopping basket, his knees protesting with a familiar ache. As he reached for a rolling apple, Derek kicked it away, sending it skittering down the aisle. "Leave it," Derek commanded. "You're going to pay for this watch, or I'm calling the police and pressing charges for assault." "Assault?" Samuel straightened up carefully, looking Derek in the eyes. "Sir, I barely touched your cart. And even if I did scratch your watch, which I don't believe I did, you just struck me. That's actual assault." Derek's face darkened further. "Are you threatening me? You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Look around, old man. Know your place." Those last 3 words hung in the air like poison gas. Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach, not fear, but a deep, weary sadness. After everything he'd lived through, after all the progress he'd seen, here he was in 2023, being told to know his place in a suburban grocery store. "I'm not threatening anyone," Samuel said quietly. "I just want to finish my shopping and go home." "Not until you pay for my watch repair," Derek insisted, grabbing Samuel's arm roughly. "That's going to be at least $500. "Please let go of me," Samuel said, his voice still calm but firm. Derek's grip tightened. "Make me." What Derek Hutchins didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Samuel Washington wasn't just a retired postal worker. He wasn't just another elderly man trying to buy groceries on a Tuesday afternoon. Samuel was a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd earned a Bronze Star for valor. He was a father of 3, a grandfather of 7, and a man who'd spent his entire life maintaining his dignity in the face of indignity. And Derek certainly didn't know that Samuel's middle son, Marcus, was the Deputy Director of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis, currently sitting in a meeting just 40 miles away in Washington, D.C., completely unaware that his father was being assaulted in a grocery store. "I said let go," Samuel repeated, his military training kicking in despite his age. He'd learned long ago how to keep his voice level in crisis situations, how to project calm even when adrenaline was flooding his system. "Or what?" Derek taunted, his fingers digging into Samuel's thin arm. That's when the store manager finally appeared, a young woman in her 30s named Patricia, who'd been watching the security camera footage from her office. She'd already called the police, but she knew she needed to intervene before this escalated further. "Sir, you need to release him right now," Patricia said firmly, addressing Derek. "I've called the police, and I have the entire incident on camera. You struck this gentleman without provocation." Derek dropped Samuel's arm but didn't back down. "He damaged my property. I want him arrested. The camera shows his cart barely touched yours and there was no contact with your watch," Patricia replied. "However, it very clearly shows you striking him. If anyone's being arrested today, it's you for assault." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Derek's face. He looked around at the other shoppers, many of whom were now recording on their phones. His bravado began to crack slightly at the edges. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're all going to side with him because of what he is." "Because of what he is?" Patricia repeated, her voice sharp. "You mean a customer who was shopping peacefully until you attacked him?" Samuel remained silent, watching the exchange with the patience of someone who'd seen this play out before in various forms. He knew that sometimes the best thing you could do was let someone else speak truth to power, let someone else be the voice of reason. The sound of sirens grew louder outside and Derek's face paled slightly. He seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, that he'd made a serious mistake. But his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. "This isn't over," he said, pointing at Samuel. "I know people. I have connections. You're going to regret this." Samuel said nothing. He simply maintained eye contact, his expression neutral but unwavering. It was a look he'd perfected over decades, the look of a man who'd faced down enemy soldiers in the jungles of Vietnam, who'd endured racism and hardship and loss, and who'd emerged with his dignity intact. Two police officers entered the store, and Patricia immediately approached them, gesturing toward Derek. "Officers, this man assaulted that elderly gentleman. I have it all on video." As the officers approached, Derek's demeanor changed. He suddenly became cooperative, even friendly. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man damaged my property, and when I confronted him about it, he became aggressive." One of the officers, a black woman in her 40s named Officer Jenkins, looked at Samuel with concern. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, thank you," Samuel replied. "Just shaken up a bit." Officer Jenkins noticed the red mark on Samuel's cheek, already beginning to darken into a bruise. She turned to her partner, a younger white officer named Reeves. "Call for an ambulance, we need to document his injuries." "That won't be necessary," Samuel protested. "Really, I'm okay." "I understand, sir, but this is protocol for an assault," Officer Jenkins explained gently. "And we'll need your statement." Derek was becoming increasingly agitated. "This is insane. I'm the victim here. He damaged my expensive watch." Officer Reeves examined Derek's watch, which showed no visible damage whatsoever. "Sir, I don't see any scratches on your watch." "It's there. You just have to look closely." While Officer Reeves dealt with Derek, Officer Jenkins took Samuel aside. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Samuel recounted the incident calmly and accurately, his years of military discipline evident in his precise, factual account. He didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate, simply stated what had occurred. As he spoke, Officer Jenkins noticed something on Samuel's jacket, a small pin indicating he was a Vietnam veteran. Her expression softened further. Her own father had served in Vietnam and had come home changed, struggling with memories he could never quite escape. "Mr. Washington," she said, having gotten his name from his driver's license, "I'm very sorry this happened to you. We're going to handle this appropriately. "I appreciate that, officer," Samuel replied. "But I just want to finish my shopping and go home. My wife is expecting me for lunch." "I understand, but we need to process this first. The gentleman who struck you is being arrested for assault." Behind them, Derek's voice rose in protest as Officer Reeves informed him he was under arrest. "This is discrimination. You're only arresting me because he's black. I want to speak to your supervisor." Officer Reeves, maintaining professional calm, replied, "Sir, we're arresting you because we have multiple witnesses and video evidence of you committing assault. Now please put your hands behind your back." The store had fallen completely silent now, all eyes on the unfolding scene. Several shoppers had gathered their courage and approached Officer Jenkins to offer statements, confirming Samuel's account. An elderly white woman, probably in her 80s, touched Samuel's arm gently. "I saw everything, dear. That man should be ashamed of himself. Are you sure you're all right?" Samuel managed a small smile. "I am, thank you, ma'am. I've been through worse." And he had. So much worse. But he didn't elaborate, didn't share the stories of the real violence he'd seen, the true hatred he'd faced in his youth. This moment, painful as it was just another chapter in a long life filled with both beauty and struggle. As the paramedics arrived to check Samuel's injuries, and as Derek was led away in handcuffs still protesting his innocence, Samuel felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from his daughter, Rachel. "Dad, just checking in. How's your day going?" Samuel looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Just fine, sweetheart. Picking up some groceries. Tell you about it later." He wasn't ready to tell his children yet. Not until he'd processed it himself, and certainly not until he'd talked to his wife, Dorothy, who'd been by his side for 48 years and who always knew exactly what to say. What Samuel didn't know was that in less than 3 hours, this entire incident would take on a life of its own. One of the shoppers who'd recorded the assault would post it on social media. Within an hour, it would have thousands of views. Within 2 hours, it would go viral. And within 3 hours, it would land on the desk of Marcus Washington, Deputy Director of Homeland Security, who would be in a budget meeting when his assistant knocked urgently on the door. "Sir?" she would say, her face pale. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. It's about your father." But for now, in this moment, Samuel Washington simply wanted to go home. He wanted to see Dorothy's face, sit in his favorite chair, and remind himself that despite everything, despite men like Derek Hutchins and moments like this, the world still held goodness. Officer Jenkins finished taking his statement and told him he was free to go. "Mr. Washington, someone from the district attorney's office will be in touch. You may need to testify." "I understand," Samuel said. "Thank you, officer." "No, sir," Officer Jenkins replied, straightening up slightly. "Thank you for your service and for handling this with such grace. I wish everyone had your composure." Samuel nodded, accepting the compliment but not dwelling on it. He gathered his shopping basket. Patricia had helped him collect the scattered items and insisted they were on the house, and made his way to the checkout. The other shoppers parted for him like the Red Sea, some offering sympathetic smiles, others looking away in embarrassment that they hadn't done more to help. Samuel didn't judge them. He understood the paralysis that comes with witnessing something shocking, the split-second calculation of whether to get involved. As he walked to his car, the spring sunshine warm on his face, Samuel took a deep breath. He was shaking now, the adrenaline finally wearing off, the full impact of what had happened settling into his bones. He sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine, gripping the steering wheel with both hands until the trembling stopped. Then he said a quiet prayer, something he'd learned from his mother, who'd taught him that prayer wasn't just for church but for every moment you needed strength. "Lord," he whispered, "help me find peace. Help that man find peace too. And help us all do better." Then Samuel Washington, veteran, father, husband, and survivor of yet another indignity, started his car and drove home to tell his wife what had happened, having no idea that his son was about to learn the same story and that the full weight of federal law enforcement was about to take a very personal interest in Derek Hutchins. Marcus Washington had been in government service for 23 years, and in that time he'd learned to keep his emotions locked in a steel box during work hours. As Deputy Director of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis, he dealt with threats to national security every single day. Terrorist cells, cyber attacks, border security breaches. He'd seen it all and maintained the cool professionalism that his position demanded. But when his assistant, Jennifer, knocked on the conference room door during the quarterly budget meeting, and he saw the expression on her face, that steel box began to crack. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Marcus said to the 4 senior officials sitting around the table, each representing different divisions within the department. "I'll just be a moment." He stepped into the hallway where Jennifer stood with her tablet, her hands trembling slightly as she held it out to him. "Sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but this video is going viral. It's already been shared over 50,000 times in the past hour, and it's being picked up by major news outlets." She paused, swallowing hard. "It's your father." Marcus took the tablet, and for the next 2 minutes and 17 seconds, he watched his 72-year-old father be humiliated, grabbed and slapped by a stranger in a grocery store. He watched it without making a sound, his jaw clenched so tightly that Jennifer could see the muscles working beneath his skin. He watched his father stumble backward, saw the red mark bloom on his cheek, heard the vicious words spat at him. When the video ended, Marcus played it again, then a third time. By the 4th viewing, his hands were shaking. "Where is he?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Where is my father right now?" "I called your mother," Jennifer said. "He's home. He's safe. Mrs. Washington said he didn't want to worry you, that he was going to tell you tonight." Marcus closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths, a technique he'd learned in crisis management training. But this wasn't some abstract threat to the nation. This was his father, the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd sat with him through every nightmare after Marcus's own tour in Iraq, who'd pinned on his badge at his swearing-in ceremony with tears in his eyes. "Who is he?" Marcus asked. "The man who did this." Jennifer had already anticipated the question. "Derek Michael Hutchins, age 43, construction worker, lives in Silver Spring. He was arrested at the scene and charged with assault. He posted bail 2 hours ago." "He's already out?" Marcus's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his professional demeanor. "Yes, sir. Standard bail for misdemeanor assault, $5,000. Marcus handed the tablet back to Jennifer, his mind already racing through the implications of this situation. He was a federal official. His father was the victim of a clear assault that had been captured on video and was now going viral. Every action he took from this moment forward would be scrutinized. He had to be careful, had to be smart, had to be above reproach. But God, he wanted to find Derek Hutchins and show him what it felt like to be helpless and humiliated. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," Marcus said. "I'm going to see my father." "Already done, sir," and Director Morrison called. He saw the video too. He said to take whatever time you need. Marcus nodded, grateful for his boss's immediate understanding. "Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for bringing this to me directly." As he walked to his office to grab his coat, Marcus pulled out his phone and called his older brother, David, a high school principal in Baltimore. David answered on the first ring. "You saw it," David said. It wasn't a question. "About 10 minutes ago. Are you with him?" "On my way now. Rachel's already there." Rachel was their younger sister, a nurse at Johns Hopkins. "Marcus, he didn't want us to make a fuss. You know how Dad is." "Yeah, I know." Marcus grabbed his keys from his desk drawer. "But this isn't just about Dad anymore. This video has over 100,000 views now. News stations are calling it. This is going to be a story, and we need to be ready for it." "What are you thinking?" Marcus was quiet for a moment as he locked his office and headed for the elevator. "I'm thinking that Derek Hutchins picked the wrong man to assault on camera. But I'm also thinking we have to be very careful about how we handle this. I can't be seen as using my position for personal revenge." "Even though that's exactly what you want to do," David said knowingly. "Even though that's exactly what I want to do," Marcus confirmed. Look, I'll be there in 45 minutes. Traffic's going to be hell. Don't let Dad try to minimize this. He needs to see a doctor, even if he says he's fine. Already scheduled. Mom made the appointment the second he walked through the door. Of course she did. Dorothy Washington had been dealing with her husband's tendency to downplay his own needs for almost 5 decades. She wasn't about to let him brush off an assault. Marcus ended the call and sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. He allowed himself 30 seconds, just 30 seconds, to feel the full rage of what he'd witnessed. He let himself imagine confronting Derek Hutchins, let himself fantasize about making the man understand the consequences of his actions. Then, as he'd been trained to do, he compartmentalized those feelings and focused on what needed to be done legally, properly, and effectively. As he drove toward his childhood home in Alexandria, where his parents still lived in the same modest house they'd bought in 1982, Marcus's phone rang constantly. Colleagues who'd seen the video, friends offering support, and, inevitably, journalists who'd somehow gotten his private number and wanted a comment. He ignored them all except one, FBI Director Catherine Chen, whom he'd worked with on several joint operations and considered a friend as well as a colleague. "Catherine," he answered. "Marcus, I just saw the video. How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, still processing. "I want you to know that if you need anything, resources, support, anything, you call me. Your father is a veteran and a victim of assault. The Bureau takes both of those things very seriously." "I appreciate that, Catherine. But right now, I just need to see him. Make sure he's really okay." "Of course, but Marcus, one more thing. We're already seeing chatter online about this incident. Some of it's supportive, but some of it's ugly. Really ugly. There are groups trying to spin this as the victim playing the race card, claiming your father provoked the attack. You should prepare your family for that." Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Let me guess. The same corners of the internet that think every use of force incident is justified. Among others. I'm having my cyber division monitor it, but I wanted you to know what's coming. This is going to get messy before it gets better." After they hung up, Marcus thought about what Catherine had said. He'd spent his career dealing with threats and ugly rhetoric, but it felt different when it was aimed at his family, when it was people he'd never met calling his father a liar, a troublemaker, claiming the assault was somehow justified or fabricated. He pulled up to his parents' house and saw David's car already in the driveway, along with Rachel's. The sight of that house, the pale blue siding his father had painted himself 5 years ago, the flower beds his mother tended every spring, the American flag hanging by the front door, hit him harder than he expected. This was home. This was safety. And someone had violated his father's sense of safety in the most public, humiliating way possible. Dorothy opened the door before he could knock, pulling him into a tight embrace. At 68, she was still strong, still the anchor that held their family together, but Marcus could feel the tremor in her hands. "He's in the living room with your brother and sister," she said quietly. "He's trying to act like it's no big deal, but his hand hasn't stopped shaking since he got home." Marcus found his father sitting in his recliner, the same one he'd had since Marcus was a teenager. David sat on the couch and Rachel was perched on the arm of their father's chair, one hand on his shoulder. All three looked up when Marcus entered, and he saw his father's eyes fill with tears. "Hey, son," Samuel said, his voice rough. "Guess you saw the show." Marcus crossed the room and knelt beside his father's chair, taking his hand. The skin was thin and papery now, marked with age spots and old scars from decades of work. The knuckles were slightly swollen from arthritis. And on his father's left cheek, an ugly bruise was spreading. "Dad," Marcus said, and his voice broke despite his best efforts. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Nothing for you to be sorry about," Samuel said, squeezing his son's hand. "Wasn't your fault. Just wrong place, wrong time, wrong person's bad day." "Don't," Marcus said firmly. "Don't make excuses for him. What he did was assault. It was wrong, and it was criminal." Samuel sighed, and in that sigh Marcus heard decades of weary acceptance. "I know, son. But getting worked up about it won't change what happened. The police arrested him. The system will handle it. The system, David interjected, his voice sharp. That let him post bail 2 hours later? That system? That's how bail works for misdemeanor assault, Rachel added, her nurse's pragmatism showing through. Which is ridiculous, considering what we all watched him do. Marcus stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where he'd grown up. This isn't going to be handled like a normal assault case, and you all need to understand that. This video has been viewed over 200,000 times now. It's on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. My office has been fielding calls from journalists all afternoon. Your office? Samuel sat forward, concern replacing his earlier calm. Marcus, you can't get involved in this officially. You'll jeopardize your position. I'm not getting involved officially, Marcus assured him. I'm taking personal time to be with my father after he was assaulted. That's all. But Dad, you need to understand that this is bigger than just you and that man now. This is about race, about violence against elderly people, about a veteran being attacked. Every advocacy group in America is going to want a piece of this story. Samuel looked at his wife, who nodded slowly. Marcus is right, Samuel. This isn't going to go away quietly. I don't want any fuss, Samuel insisted. I just want to move on. And you will, Marcus said, returning to kneel beside his father's chair. But first, we're going to make sure justice is served. Not revenge, justice. There's a difference, and I need you to trust me to know where that line is. Samuel studied his son's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But you promise me something, Marcus. You don't do anything that could hurt your career. You've worked too hard to get where you are. I promise, Marcus said, though even as he spoke the words, he was already thinking about Derek Hutchins, about the man's smug face in the video, about the casual cruelty of that slap. Rachel's phone buzzed and she looked at it with a frown. The video's up to 500,000 views, and there's a hashtag trending, Justice for Samuel. Oh Lord, Dorothy said, sinking into the couch beside David. This is going to be a circus, isn't it? Probably, Marcus admitted. Which is why we need to get ahead of it. Dad, the district attorney's office will want to meet with you tomorrow. They're going to want to pursue this case aggressively, especially now that it's getting national attention. Do I have to do anything? Samuel asked. Just tell the truth. That's all you ever have to do. What none of them knew yet was that Derek Hutchins was, at that very moment, sitting in his own living room, scrolling through his phone with growing horror as he realized just how badly he'd miscalculated. The video had been shared by his employer's social media page, tagged by angry users demanding he be fired. His girlfriend had already left him, unable to handle the hateful messages flooding her inbox. And his mother had called 3 times, crying, asking him how he could do such a thing. But Derek was still convinced he could spin this. He'd already called 2 lawyers, both of whom had declined to represent him after seeing the video. But he'd find someone. He had to. Because the alternative, accepting responsibility and facing the consequences, was unthinkable. Meanwhile, in offices across Washington, D.C., people who'd never met Samuel Washington but who'd seen that video were making decisions. The NAACP was preparing a statement. The American Legion was calling for a full investigation. Civil rights attorneys were offering their services pro bono. And in the White House press office, they were drafting talking points in case the president was asked about it. Marcus stayed with his parents until evening, helping his mother make dinner while his father dozed in his chair, exhausted from the day's trauma. As they worked side by side in the kitchen where he'd learned to cook, Dorothy finally broke down, tears streaming down her face as she chopped vegetables. I thought we were past this, she whispered. I thought after everything we'd been through, everything that's changed in this country, we were past random strangers thinking they could put their hands on my husband because of the color of his skin. Marcus put down the pot he was holding and wrapped his arms around his mother. We're going to get through this, Mom, I promise. You can't promise that, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. You can't control what people think or feel or do. None of us can. She was right, of course, but Marcus had spent his career protecting people from threats, and he wasn't about to stop now just because the threat was against his own family. He would find a way to ensure Derek Hutchins faced appropriate consequences. He would do it legally, ethically, and properly. But he would do it. As darkness fell and the family sat down to dinner together, something they rarely got to do anymore with everyone's busy schedules, Samuel's phone rang. He looked at the unknown number and almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Washington, this is Veronica Torres from the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm calling to offer our organization's full support in pursuing justice for what happened to you today. We believe this attack may have been a hate crime, and we'd like to help ensure the perpetrator is charged accordingly." Samuel listened, his family watching him with concern. When he hung up, he looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world, his wife of 48 years, his 3 children who'd exceeded every dream he'd ever had for them. "That was a civil rights lawyer," he said quietly. "She wants to help. There've been 6 calls like that today." "What did you tell her?" Marcus asked. "I said I'd think about it." Samuel set his phone face down on the table. "But honestly, I'm 72 years old. I've been dealing with men like Derek Hutchins my whole life. I survived Vietnam. I survived growing up in Georgia in the 50s and 60s. I survived working in jobs where I was the only black man in the building. I don't need this fight. But maybe this fight needs you," David said gently. "Dad, think about what this could mean. That man hit you because he thought he could get away with it. He thought there would be no consequences. If we let this go, what message does that send?" Samuel was quiet for a long time, looking down at his plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "I'll do whatever the law requires of me. I'll testify if I need to. I'll cooperate with the investigation. But I'm not going on television. I'm not giving interviews. I'm not becoming some symbol. I'm just a man who got slapped in a grocery store and wants to move on with his life." Marcus reached across the table and took his father's hand. "That's fair, Dad. That's completely fair, and we'll make sure everyone respects that." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The video had been viewed over 1 million times now. Tomorrow, it would be the lead story on morning news shows. And Derek Hutchins, who thought he was just teaching an old man a lesson, had no idea that he'd just become the face of everything wrong with America. Derek Hutchins woke up Wednesday morning to find his life in ruins. His construction company had fired him via email at 6:47 a.m. The message was brief and coldly professional. "Due to recent events that have brought negative attention to our organization and violated our code of conduct, your employment is terminated effective immediately." His phone had 247 unread messages, most of them hateful. Someone had found his address and posted it online, and by sunrise there were protesters on his lawn holding signs that read, "Coward" and "Veteran Lives Matter." His elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd always smiled and waved at him, now refused to make eye contact when he looked out the window. But the worst part, the part that made Derek's stomach churn with genuine fear, was the letter that had been slipped under his door sometime during the night. It was from a law firm he'd never heard of, informing him that they were representing Samuel Washington in a civil lawsuit seeking damages for assault, battery, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights. The amount they were seeking, $2 million. Derek sat on his couch in his underwear, staring at the letter with shaking hands. $2 million. He didn't have $2 million. He didn't have $200,000. He had about $8,000 in his checking account, and a truck he was still making payments on. His phone rang again. His mother calling for the 10th time that morning. He finally answered. "Derek Michael Hutchins, what were you thinking?" Her voice was thick with tears and disappointment. "I raised you better than this. How could you hit an old man, a veteran?" "Mom, you don't understand. He damaged my watch and he was being disrespectful." "I don't care if he spit in your face. You don't put your hands on someone like that. And now it's everywhere. People at my church are asking me about it, my bridge club, even the mailman asked me about it. Do you know how humiliating this is? How humiliating it is for you?" Derek's voice rose. Mom, I lost my job. There are people outside my house right now. I'm the one being persecuted here. His mother was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold in a way he'd never heard before. You're not being persecuted, Derek. You're facing consequences. There's a difference, and until you understand that, don't call me. She hung up. Derek threw his phone across the room, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. This wasn't fair. It was just a slap. The old man was fine. Why was everyone acting like he'd committed murder? But even as he tried to justify his actions to himself, Derek couldn't stop replaying the video. He'd watched it 20 times now, each viewing more uncomfortable than the last. In the harsh light of retrospect, he could see what everyone else saw: a big man bullying someone smaller, older, and vulnerable. He could hear the ugly tone of his own voice, see the cruelty in his expression. And those 3 words that haunted him most: know your place. Had he really said that? Had he really been that person? His doorbell rang, and Derek ignored it, assuming it was more protesters. But then came a loud knock and a voice. Mr. Hutchins, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Montgomery County Police. I need to speak with you about an additional investigation. Additional investigation? Derek's heart began to race as he pulled on pants and a shirt. When he opened the door, he found a woman in her 40s wearing plain clothes and a badge on her belt. Behind her stood another detective. Mr. Hutchins, I'm Detective Morrison, and this is Detective James Park. May we come in? What's this about? Derek asked, not moving from the doorway. I already gave my statement yesterday. I posted bail. I'm complying with all the terms of my release. This is about a different matter, Detective Morrison said, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. We've received information that suggests this may not have been an isolated incident. We'd like to ask you some questions about your interactions with other people over the past several months. Derek's mind raced. What were they talking about? What interactions? I don't understand, he said, hating how his voice shook. We've received reports from other individuals who claim to have had confrontations with you, similar to what happened with Mr. Washington, but previously unreported. We're investigating whether there's a pattern of behavior here. Derek felt the blood drain from his face. He thought about the teenager at the fast food restaurant 3 months ago, the one he'd shoved after the kid had taken too long counting out change. The woman at the gym who'd been on the machine he wanted, he'd called her some names, gotten in her face. The elderly man at the gas station who'd bumped into him, Derek had followed him to his car, shouting threats. None of those people had called the police. He'd gotten away with all of it. But now that this video had gone viral, were they coming forward? I want a lawyer, Derek said, the only smart thing he'd said in 2 days. That's your right, Detective Morrison replied. But Mr. Hutchins, I'll be straight with you. If you've assaulted other people and they're willing to testify, this simple misdemeanor assault charge could become something much more serious. Pattern of behavior, hate crimes potentially. The district attorney is very interested in this case. After they left, Derek finally understood the gravity of his situation. This wasn't going away. This wasn't just going to blow over. He'd assaulted a man on camera, and now the full weight of the justice system was bearing down on him. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, Samuel Washington was sitting in the office of Assistant District Attorney Michelle Park, a sharp woman in her 50s, who specialized in assault cases. Marcus had taken another day of personal leave to accompany his father, and Dorothy sat on Samuel's other side, holding his hand. Mr. Washington, Michelle said, her voice gentle but professional. I want to be clear with you about what we're dealing with here. This case is very straightforward from a legal standpoint. We have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and a clear perpetrator. Mr. Hutchins will almost certainly be convicted. That's good, Samuel said quietly. However, Michelle continued, there are some complications. Since your assault went viral, we've received calls from 7 other people claiming they were also assaulted or threatened by Derek Hutchins over the past year. None of them reported it at the time because they didn't think anyone would believe them, or they were afraid of retaliation. Samuel's eyes widened. 7 people? 7 so far. We expect more to come forward. This changes the case significantly. If we can establish a pattern of violent behavior, especially if that pattern shows he targeted vulnerable individuals, elderly people, minorities, women, we can pursue enhanced charges. Marcus leaned forward. What kind of enhanced charges? Potentially hate crime enhancements, which would increase the penalties substantially. Also, civil rights violations. The Justice Department has already reached out to me. They're interested in pursuing federal charges in addition to the state case. Samuel shook his head slowly. This is getting too big. I don't know what I wanted. Justice, I suppose. But not this. Not a national case. Dad, Marcus said gently, if this man has been terrorizing people for months or years, and your case is what finally stops him, isn't that worth something? But at what cost? Samuel looked at his son with tired eyes. This is my life now. Every time someone looks at me, they'll see that video. They'll see me getting slapped, stumbling backward, being humiliated. Is that what you want people to remember about me? Dorothy squeezed her husband's hand. Samuel, they'll also see a man who stood with dignity, who didn't retaliate with violence, who let the system work the way it's supposed to. Michelle gave them a moment before speaking again. Mr. Washington, I understand your concerns, but I need you to consider something else. Those 7 people who came forward, they're watching to see what happens to you. If Derek Hutchins gets a slap on the wrist, if this case just quietly goes away, what message does that send to other bullies? What message does it send to other victims? Samuel was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands, the same hands that had once carried a rifle in Vietnam, that had sorted mail for 30 years, that had held his children and grandchildren. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said. I'll do whatever you need me to do, but I won't do interviews. I won't become some public figure. I'll testify in court, but that's it. That's all we need, Michelle assured him. Your testimony and the video evidence will be more than enough. As they left the DA's office, Samuel felt Marcus's phone vibrate repeatedly. His son checked it and frowned. What is it? Samuel asked. Derek Hutchins just posted something on social media, an apology. Let me see, Dorothy said, and Marcus handed her the phone. They stood in the parking lot reading Derek's statement together. I want to sincerely apologize to Mr. Samuel Washington and his family for my actions on Tuesday afternoon. I was having a bad day, and I let my anger get the best of me. I should never have put my hands on Mr. Washington, and I deeply regret my behavior. I am not a racist. I was raised to respect all people regardless of their background. This was a moment of weakness that does not reflect who I truly am. I hope Mr. Washington and the public can find it in their hearts to forgive me. I am seeking counseling to address my anger issues and will work to become a better person. Samuel read it twice, then handed the phone back to Marcus. What do you think? I think his lawyer wrote it, Marcus said bluntly. I think it's carefully crafted to reduce his legal liability while trying to salvage his public image. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't take full responsibility. He calls it a moment of weakness and a bad day, like external circumstances caused his behavior, instead of his own choices. Marcus, Dorothy chided gently, you can't know that's not genuine. Mom, I've spent 23 years analyzing threats and reading people. This is damage control, not genuine remorse. But Samuel was thinking about something else. He was thinking about a young man named Robert Jenkins who'd fought beside him in Vietnam. Robert had been hot-headed, quick to anger, always getting into fights. One night, drunk and furious over a letter from his girlfriend back home, Robert had nearly beaten another soldier to death. Samuel had been the one to pull him off, to sit with him while he cried, to help him understand that his anger was going to destroy him if he didn't find a way to control it. Robert had gotten help. He'd changed. Years later, he'd written to Samuel thanking him for saving his life that night. Maybe he is sorry, Samuel said quietly. Maybe he does want to change. Marcus looked at his father with a mixture of respect and frustration. Dad, after what he did to you, you're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying he shouldn't face consequences, Samuel clarified. I'm saying people can change. I've seen it. I've lived it. If his apology is genuine, then maybe some good can come from all this after all. What none of them knew was that Derek's apology was indeed written by his lawyer, but that didn't mean it was entirely false. Derek had spent the previous night lying awake, genuinely wrestling with what he'd done. The problem was that Derek's understanding of his own racism was shallow. He thought racism was burning crosses and using slurs, not the casual assumption that he could put his hands on an old black man and face no real consequences. Back in his apartment, Derek was reading the responses to his apology. They ranged from supportive, "Everyone makes mistakes, God forgives you," to viciously critical, "Your apology means nothing, you showed us who you really are," to thoughtful, "If you're truly sorry, you'll accept whatever consequences come and use this as an opportunity to genuinely examine your prejudices." One comment in particular caught his attention. It was from a username VietnamVet72, and simply said, "I forgive you, but you must still face justice. Those are not contradictory things." SW. Derek stared at those words for a long time. Samuel Washington had actually responded to his apology. The man he'd assaulted was offering forgiveness, while still insisting on accountability. It was more grace than Derek deserved, and he knew it. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Derek felt something other than self-pity or defensive anger. He felt genuine shame. Not shame at getting caught, but shame at who he'd allowed himself to become. He picked up his phone and called the number for the counseling service his lawyer had recommended. When the receptionist answered, Derek said, "My name is Derek Hutchins, and I need help. Real help. Not just for court, for me." Meanwhile, the case was taking on a life of its own. The 7 other victims had been interviewed by police, and their stories painted a disturbing picture. Derek had a pattern of targeting people he perceived as weaker or less able to fight back. An elderly Asian woman he'd shoved in a parking lot. A teenage Hispanic boy he'd threatened at a bus stop. A small white man with a disability he'd mocked and intimidated at a bar. Each victim had stayed silent because they didn't think anyone would care, or because they were afraid of making things worse. But seeing Samuel's video had given them courage. Seeing that someone was finally being held accountable made them believe that maybe, just maybe, their stories mattered too. Detective Morrison compiled all the evidence into a comprehensive report. She'd been a cop for 20 years and she'd seen a lot of bullies. Most of them never changed. They just got older and angrier. But every once in a while, something happened that forced them to confront who they really were. She hoped, for everyone's sake, that Derek Hutchins was capable of that kind of confrontation. Because the alternative, a man who learned nothing from this except that he needed to be more careful about cameras, was too depressing to contemplate. As the week drew to a close, the media frenzy reached its peak. Every major news outlet had covered the story. Talk shows debated it. Social media was consumed by it. And through it all, Samuel Washington maintained his quiet dignity, declining interview requests, going about his life as normally as possible despite the fact that strangers now recognized him at the grocery store. On Friday evening, Marcus came by his parents' house with news. "Dad, the DA called me. They're offering Derek Hutchins a plea deal." Samuel looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading. "What kind of deal?" "They'll drop the hate crime enhancement if he pleads guilty to the assault charges, agrees to complete anger management counseling, performs 200 hours of community service at a veterans center, and issues a formal apology, in person, to you. And if he doesn't take the deal?" They go to trial with all the evidence from all 9 victims. 2 more came forward yesterday. He could face up to 5 years in prison with the enhanced charges. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What do you think he'll do?" Marcus sat down across from his father. "Honestly, I think he'll take the deal. But Dad, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what you want. This is your decision." Samuel looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at his son. "I want him to understand what he did and why it was wrong. I want him to get help so he doesn't hurt anyone else. And yes, I want to hear him apologize to my face." If this deal accomplishes those things, then I support it. Even though he won't go to prison? Prison doesn't change everyone, son. Sometimes it just makes them harder, angrier. If there's a chance he can actually learn something from this, become a better person, isn't that worth more than revenge? Marcus smiled sadly. You're a better man than I am, Dad. I'm still not sure I could be that forgiving. It's not about forgiveness, Samuel corrected gently. Not yet, anyway. Forgiveness is something I might get to eventually. Right now, this is about justice that actually serves a purpose. Punishment without rehabilitation is just cruelty. And I've had enough cruelty in my life. I don't need to contribute more to the world. As Marcus hugged his father goodbye that night, he marveled at the man's capacity for grace. Samuel Washington had every right to demand the maximum punishment, to want Derek Hutchins to suffer the way he'd suffered. But instead, he was choosing a path that left room for redemption. It was, Marcus thought, the most powerful form of strength there was. 3 weeks later, Derek Hutchins stood in the parking lot of the Alexandria Veterans Center, his hands trembling as he checked his reflection in his truck's side mirror one more time. He'd lost 15 pounds since the assault. Stress had killed his appetite completely. His eyes were ringed with dark circles from sleepless nights, and his face had taken on a gaunt, haunted quality. Inside the building, Samuel Washington would be waiting. Derek's lawyer, Robert Chen, had explained the terms of the plea deal in excruciating detail. Derek would plead guilty to assault and battery. He would be sentenced to 6 months of home confinement with electronic monitoring, 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management and racial bias counseling, 200 hours of community service at this very veteran center, and he would issue a formal in-person apology to Samuel Washington. The alternative was going to trial, where 9 victims would testify about his pattern of violence and intimidation, where experts would explain how his behavior fit textbook definitions of hate crimes, where he would almost certainly be convicted and face years in actual prison. It wasn't really a choice at all, but standing here now, knowing he was about to face the man whose life he'd so casually tried to diminish, Derek felt something he hadn't fully experienced yet. Genuine terror. Not of legal consequences, but of having to look Samuel Washington in the eyes and reckon with what he'd done. The 3 weeks since the incident had been transformative in ways Derek never could have imagined. His court-ordered counselor, Dr. Patricia Williams, a black woman in her 60s, had not let him hide behind excuses or comfortable lies about himself. You think you're not racist because you don't use slurs, she'd said in their first session. But Derek, racism isn't just about what words you use. It's about who you think has value, who you think deserves respect, who you think you can put your hands on without consequences. Those words had gutted him, because they were true. Dr. Williams had made him do homework, watching documentaries about the civil rights movement, reading memoirs by black veterans who'd fought for a country that didn't fully recognize their humanity, researching the specific challenges faced by elderly people of color. Each assignment had peeled back another layer of Derek's comfortable ignorance. But the most devastating assignment had been the one Dr. Williams gave him 2 days ago. Write down everything you know about Samuel Washington, not the man you saw in the grocery store, the actual person, his life, his history, who he really is. Derek had done the research, and what he'd discovered had made him physically ill. Samuel Washington had enlisted in the Army in 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War. He'd been 19 years old. He'd served 2 tours, earning a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers from a burning helicopter while under enemy fire. He'd come home to a country that spat on veterans and a South that still enforced Jim Crow laws. He'd worked as a postal carrier for 33 years, never missing a day of work except when his mother died. He'd married Dorothy in 1975 and raised 3 children, all of whom had graduated from college. He volunteered at his church, mentored young men in his neighborhood, and had fostered 7 children over the years, giving them stability when their own families couldn't. The man Derek had slapped wasn't just an old man. He was a genuine American hero who'd spent his entire life serving others, and Derek had hit him over a watch that hadn't even been scratched. You ready? Robert Chen's voice broke through Derek's thoughts. His lawyer had insisted on accompanying him, both for legal protection and, Derek suspected, to make sure he didn't lose his nerve. "No," Derek said honestly, "but I have to do this." They walked into the Veterans Center together, and Derek was immediately struck by the photographs lining the walls. Veterans from every American conflict: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Black faces, white faces, brown faces. All of them young in their photos, all of them wearing the same expression of determined courage. Had Samuel Washington once looked like these young men, before life and age and men like Derek had worn him down? They were led to a small conference room where Samuel sat at a table with his wife Dorothy, his son Marcus, and Assistant District Attorney Michelle Park. Also present was the director of the Veterans Center, a woman named Colonel, retired, Janet Foster, and Dr. Williams, Derek's counselor. Samuel looked smaller than Derek remembered, more fragile. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a yellowish shadow, but Derek could still see where his hand had landed. The sight made him feel sick. "Mr. Hutchins," Colonel Foster said formally, "please have a seat." Derek sat across from Samuel, unable to maintain eye contact. His carefully rehearsed apology suddenly felt inadequate, hollow. How could any words undo what he'd done? Michelle Park began. "We're here today so that Mr. Hutchins can fulfill one of the terms of his plea agreement, a formal in-person apology to Mr. Washington. This apology will be recorded for the court record. Mr. Hutchins, you may proceed whenever you're ready." Derek's throat felt like it was closing up. He looked down at the piece of paper where he'd written his apology, but the words blurred in front of his eyes. Finally, he looked up at Samuel. "Mr. Washington," he began, his voice cracking. I don't know how to—" He stopped, took a breath, tried again. "3 weeks ago, I assaulted you in a grocery store. I grabbed you, I slapped you. I humiliated you in front of dozens of people. And I did it because I was angry, and because I thought I could. I thought there wouldn't be consequences. I thought you were just someone I could push around." Derek's hands were shaking so badly he had to press them flat against the table. "But you're not just someone. You're Samuel Washington. You're a Bronze Star recipient. You served 2 tours in Vietnam. You've lived 72 years with more dignity and grace than I've shown in my entire life. And I hit you." Tears were streaming down Derek's face now, and he didn't try to stop them. "I've spent 3 weeks learning about who you are, about what you've done for this country, for your community, for your family, and I've spent 3 weeks trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would do what I did to you." He paused, gathering his courage for what came next. "I want to tell you that I'm not racist, that this wasn't about your skin color. But Dr. Williams has helped me understand that would be a lie. Maybe I don't think I'm racist. Maybe I never used certain words or burned crosses or anything like that. But I looked at you and saw someone I thought was beneath me, someone whose dignity didn't matter. And I need to face the truth that my actions that day were rooted in racism, even if I don't want to admit it." Samuel sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Dorothy had her hand on his arm, and Marcus was watching Derek with hard eyes that promised severe consequences if this apology wasn't genuine. "I know I can't undo what I did," Derek continued. "I know that no apology will erase that video or take away the humiliation you felt. But I want you to know that I am profoundly sorry. Not just because I got caught, not just because there were consequences, but because what I did was wrong in the deepest possible way. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who would never do something like that again." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Samuel spoke for the first time. "Why did you really do it?" His voice was quiet, but firm. "Not the excuse about your watch or having a bad day. Why did you think you could put your hands on me?" Derek knew this was the moment of truth. He could deflect, minimize, make excuses, or he could be brutally honest. "Because I've spent my whole life being bigger and stronger than most people," Derek said slowly. "And I've used that to intimidate others when I was angry or frustrated. And I've especially done it to people I thought wouldn't fight back or wouldn't be believed if they did. Elderly people, small people, women, people of color. I've been a bully my entire adult life, and I never had to face real consequences until I hit you on camera. There were 8 other people, Samuel said. Did you know that? 8 other people who came forward after my video went viral. People you'd hurt or threatened who'd stayed silent because they were afraid or because they didn't think anyone would care. Derek's face crumbled. I knew there were incidents, but I didn't think of them as victims. I just thought they were conflicts. They weren't conflicts, Marcus interjected, his voice hard. Conflicts are between equals. What you did was assault and terrorize people who couldn't fight back. I know that now, Derek said, and I'm sorry to them too. I've written individual apologies to each of them as part of my counseling. Dr. Williams spoke up. I can attest that Derek has been doing serious work in our sessions. He's confronting very uncomfortable truths about himself. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it does suggest a genuine commitment to change. Samuel studied Derek's face for a long time. Then he asked, "What happened to you? What made you into someone who hurts people?" The question caught Derek off guard. He'd expected anger, condemnation, maybe even rejection of his apology. He hadn't expected curiosity about his own pain. "My father," Derek said quietly. "He was violent. He used to beat me and my mother. He'd get drunk and angry, and he'd take it out on us. He told me constantly that the world was divided into winners and losers, strong and weak. He said if you didn't dominate others, they'd dominate you." "Did you ever get help for that?" Dorothy asked, gently. "No, ma'am. I guess I became what I was taught to be. I became him, even though I hated him. I swore I'd never be like him, but then I'd get angry, and I'd hear his voice in my head telling me to show people who's boss. To not let anyone disrespect me." Samuel nodded slowly. "My father was a sharecropper in Georgia. White landowners treated him like property, spoke to him like he wasn't fully human. And you know what he told me? He said that kind of treatment could make you bitter, could make you want to hurt others the way you'd been hurt. But he said the real strength was in breaking that cycle, in refusing to pass on the pain you'd received." Derek felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Here was a man who had every reason to hate Derek, offering him wisdom instead of condemnation. "I don't know if I can break that cycle," Derek admitted. "I don't know if I can become someone different." "The fact that you're here," Samuel said, "the fact that you're trying, that's the first step. But Derek, you need to understand something. I can accept your apology. I can even forgive you, though that's going to take time. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. You're going to have to live with what you did. You're going to have to do the work of becoming better. And that's not going to be easy or quick." "I understand," Derek said. "Do you?" Samuel leaned forward slightly. "Because here's what I want from you. Beyond this apology and the terms of your plea deal, I want you to use what happened to help others. I want you to talk to young men who are heading down the same path you are on. I want you to tell them your story, the whole story, including how badly it turned out. I want your experience to mean something, to prevent someone else from making the same mistakes." "I'll do that," Derek said immediately. "Whatever you want. Whatever helps." Colonel Foster spoke up. "Actually, Mr. Washington and I have discussed this. As part of his community service, Derek will be working here at the Veterans Center. He'll be helping with maintenance, assisting with events, and yes, speaking to groups about his experience. With Mr. Washington's permission, Samuel has agreed to mentor him through this process." Derek's head snapped up. You'd do that? After what I did?" Samuel's expression was serious but not unkind. "Someone gave me a second chance once. Multiple people, actually. When I came back from Vietnam angry and struggling, people in my community didn't give up on me. They showed me there was another way to live. Maybe I can do that for you, but Derek, understand this. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I don't want there to be a 9th or 10th victim. I'm doing it because breaking cycles of violence is how we make the world better." Derek couldn't speak. He could only nod. tears streaming down his face again. The grace being offered to him was overwhelming, almost unbearable. He didn't deserve it. He knew he didn't deserve it. But Samuel was offering it anyway. Michelle Park concluded the meeting. Mr. Hutchins, your formal apology is accepted and recorded. Your community service will begin next Monday at 8 a.m. You will report directly to Colonel Foster. Any violation of your plea terms will result in immediate revocation and prosecution on the original charges. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Derek said. As everyone stood to leave, Samuel approached Derek. Up close, Derek could see every line in the older man's face, every year of life and experience etched there. Samuel extended his hand. I'll see you Monday morning, Samuel said. Don't be late. And Derek, come ready to work, not just physically, but on yourself. Derek took Samuel's hand, shaking it carefully, still afraid of causing any harm. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet, Samuel replied. Wait until you've earned it. As Derek left the building with his lawyer, he felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because he'd finally faced Samuel and taken real accountability. Heavier because he now understood the full weight of what he'd done and what would be required to make amends. Robert Chen clapped him on the shoulder. You did good in there. That was genuine. The judge will be pleased. But Derek wasn't thinking about the judge or the legal consequences anymore. He was thinking about Monday morning, about showing up to work alongside veterans who'd served their country while he'd spent his life being a bully. About Samuel Washington, who had every right to hate him, but was choosing redemption instead. As he drove home, Derek passed the grocery store where it had all happened. He slowed down, looking at the entrance where he'd stood 3 weeks ago, so certain of his own righteousness, so blind to his own cruelty. That man was gone now. Or at least Derek hoped he was. The real test would be whether he could build something better in his place. What Derek didn't know, what no one except Samuel knew, was that this entire plan had been Samuel's idea from the beginning. When the plea deal was first proposed, Samuel had asked for a private meeting with Colonel Foster. I've been thinking, Samuel had said, about that young man, about what might actually change him. You want to mentor him? Colonel Foster had been skeptical. Samuel, after what he did, especially because of what he did. Janet, I've been around long enough to know the difference between evil and ignorance. Derek Hutchins isn't evil. He's ignorant, and he's been shaped by violence and bad teaching. But I see something in that apology he posted, in the way he's taking responsibility. I think there's a chance to actually change him. And if we can change one person, prevent future victims, isn't that worth the discomfort? Colonel Foster had eventually agreed, and together, they'd proposed the mentorship as part of the community service requirement. Marcus had been horrified at first, but Dorothy had understood immediately. Your father has always believed in redemption, she'd told Marcus. He's not being naive. He's being strategic. He's taking someone who could have been lost to anger and violence and trying to turn him into someone who might actually do good in the world. Now, as Samuel drove home from that meeting, he felt at peace with his decision. He'd looked into Derek Hutchins's eyes and seen genuine remorse, genuine desire to change. That didn't erase what Derek had done, but it opened a door to something better. What are you thinking about? Dorothy asked from the passenger seat. About circles, Samuel said. About how violence and hatred travel in circles passed from father to son, generation to generation, and about how much courage it takes to step out of that circle and start walking a different path. You think he can do it? I think he wants to. And sometimes that's enough to start with. What neither of them could have anticipated was that this story, this unlikely partnership between victim and perpetrator, was about to take an unexpected turn that would reveal just how interconnected their lives had been all along. 6 months had passed since that first Monday morning when Derek Hutchins had shown up at the Alexandria Veterans Center, his hands still shaking with nervousness and shame. Now, on a crisp October morning, he was replacing the hinges on a storage room door while Samuel supervised, occasionally offering advice about technique. The transformation had been slow but undeniable. Derek had lost the defensive posture he'd carried for so long, the chip on his shoulder that had made him see every interaction as a potential conflict. He'd gained something else instead: humility, and the beginning of wisdom that comes from genuine self-reflection. "You're getting better at that," Samuel observed, watching Derek work with careful precision. "First week you were here, you would have forced those screws in. Now you're taking your time, doing it right." "You told me that everything worth doing is worth doing correctly," Derek replied, not looking up from his work. "Said my father taught me to rush through life, always looking for the shortcut. But shortcuts just mean you have to do things twice." Samuel smiled. It had become one of his favorite sayings during their time together, and hearing Derek repeat it back felt like evidence that something was actually taking root. Over the past 6 months, Derek had completed his 200 hours of community service, but he'd kept showing up anyway. He'd started volunteering 20 hours a week, working with veterans, listening to their stories, and slowly beginning to understand what service and sacrifice actually meant. He'd also started speaking at schools and community centers about his experience, always with Samuel's permission and often with Samuel present. His talks were raw and honest, holding nothing back about who he'd been and what he'd done. More than one young man had approached him afterward, saying Derek's story had made them think differently about their own anger and how they treated others. "Mr. Washington," Derek said, finishing with the last hinge, "can I ask you something?" "You know you can." "Why did you really do this? Mentor me, I mean. I've been trying to understand it for 6 months, and I still can't figure it out. After what I did, you should hate me." "Most people would." Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's take a walk. I want to show you something." They walked through the Veterans Center to a wall Samuel had shown Derek before, a memorial wall with photographs and names of local veterans who'd died in service or had passed away since returning home. Samuel stopped in front of one photograph in particular, a young white man in his early 20s with a cocky grin and bright blue eyes. "This is Danny Hutchins," Samuel said. "He was killed in action in Vietnam in 1969, stepped on a landmine while trying to help a wounded soldier. He was 23 years old." Derek stared at the name, his heart beginning to pound. "Hutchins, was he related to me?" "Your uncle," Samuel said softly. "Your father's older brother." Derek's legs felt weak. He'd known he had an uncle who died in Vietnam. His father had mentioned it once or twice in drunken rants about government and war, but he'd never known any details, never seen a picture. His father had refused to talk about it beyond those brief, bitter references. "How do you know this?" Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel reached up and touched the photograph gently, the way you might touch something sacred. "Because Danny Hutchins saved my life." The world seemed to tilt beneath Derek's feet. "What?" "We were in the same unit," Samuel explained, his voice heavy with memory. "November 1969, near the Cambodian border. We were ambushed. I was pinned down, wounded, and there were 3 other guys wounded worse than me. Danny ran through enemy fire twice to drag us to safety. On his 3rd trip back, he stepped on that mine." Samuel turned to face Derek, and his eyes were wet with tears. "I've spent 54 years carrying Danny Hutchins with me, wondering why he lived and I died, wondering if I'd done enough with the life he gave me to make his sacrifice worth it. And then 6 months ago I looked into your face in that grocery store, and later, when I learned your full name, I wondered if God was giving me a chance to do for Danny's nephew what I couldn't do for Danny." Derek couldn't breathe. The coincidence was too enormous, too impossible. "You knew? When you offered to mentor me, you knew I was his nephew?" "Not at first. But when your lawyer sent over your background information for the plea hearing, I saw your father's name, Michael Hutchins. I remembered Danny talking about his little brother Mickey, how he worried about him because their father was violent, how he hoped Mickey would have a better life. And I realized that you were the son of the boy Danny had worried about." Derek slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. Everything he thought he understood about the past 6 months was shifting, rearranging itself into a new pattern. "So this whole thing," Derek said, his voice choked. "The mentorship, the forgiveness, it was because of my uncle? Out of obligation to him?" "No," Samuel said firmly, sitting down beside him. "It started because of Danny, yes. But Derek, if I'd spent these 6 months with you and saw that you weren't genuinely trying to change, that you were just going through the motions, I would have stopped. Danny's sacrifice doesn't obligate me to waste time on someone who won't do the work. But you have done the work. You've shown up. You've been honest. You've changed." Derek looked at the photograph of his uncle. The uncle he'd never known, but who'd apparently died a hero. "My father never told me details about him. Just that he died in the war and it was a waste." "It wasn't a waste," Samuel said quietly. "Danny Hutchins saved 5 men that day. We all came home. We all had families. We all lived lives because of what he did. I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren. The other men he saved have families too. That's dozens of lives that exist because your uncle was brave enough to run into fire instead of away from it. Why didn't my father see it that way?" Samuel sighed. "Some people respond to loss with grief that turns into bitterness. They can't accept that someone they loved is gone, so they decide the cause must have been worthless. It's a way of protecting yourself from the pain of thinking someone you loved died for something meaningful, because meaningful losses hurt worse than meaningless ones." Derek wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I wish I'd known him. Known that I came from someone good. My father only taught me to be angry and afraid." "But you're learning something different now," Samuel said, "and maybe that's part of why Danny sent me to that grocery store that day." "You don't really believe that," Derek said, "that it was fate or divine intervention or whatever." Samuel smiled slightly. "Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But I believe in taking the opportunities we're given to do good. And I believe your uncle would be proud of the work you're doing now, even if the path to get here was painful." They sat in silence for a while, 2 men from different generations and different worlds bound together by violence and grace, and the ghost of a young soldier who died 54 years ago. Finally, Derek spoke. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been working on with Dr. Williams." "What is it?" "I've been reaching out to the other people I hurt. All 9 of them. Writing letters, asking to meet with them if they're willing. 3 of them have agreed to meet with me. One of them, Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman I shoved in the parking lot, she said she'd accept my apology if I agreed to volunteer at a senior center once a week for a year." Samuel's face lit up with genuine pride. "And what did you say?" "I said yes, obviously. Mr. Washington, you taught me that redemption isn't something you earn once. It's something you work at every day. So I'm going to keep working at it, with every person I hurt, in every way I can." "That's good, Derek. That's very good." "There's more," Derek continued. "I want to go back to school, get my GED first. I dropped out of high school junior year, and then maybe community college. I've been thinking about social work, working with at-risk youth or something, using what I've learned to help kids who are growing up like I did." Samuel put his hand on Derek's shoulder. "Your uncle would be proud of you." Those words broke something open in Derek that had been locked tight his whole life. He'd spent 43 years believing he came from nothing, that violence and anger were his only inheritance. But now he knew he came from a hero, from someone who'd run toward danger to save others. Maybe that was in him too, buried deep beneath all the layers of hurt and learned hatred. Maybe he could dig it out and build something good from it. 2 weeks later, the entire Washington family gathered at the Veterans Center for a special ceremony. Colonel Foster had organized it, but the idea had come from Marcus, who'd spent months wrestling with his own feelings about Derek Hutchins. The ceremony was to honor Danny Hutchins posthumously with a community service award, recognizing both his military sacrifice and the ripple effects of that sacrifice that were still being felt decades later. Derek stood at the front of the room, holding a folded flag and a plaque, his hands steady for the first time in 7 months. "My uncle, Danny Hutchins, died before I was born," Derek said to the assembled crowd of veterans, community members, and journalists. who'd followed this story from its viral beginning to this unexpected continuation. I never got to know him, but I've spent the past few months learning who he was through the man he saved, Samuel Washington. Derek's voice wavered, but held. Danny ran into fire to save lives. I spent most of my life running toward people with my fists. When I assaulted Mr. Washington 7 months ago, I thought I was strong. But I was the weakest kind of person. Someone who uses their size to intimidate others. My uncle was truly strong. He used his strength to protect people. He turned to Samuel, who stood beside him. Mr. Washington has shown me what my uncle's sacrifice actually meant. Not just that he died, but that he died believing in something bigger than himself. Service. Honor. The idea that some people are worth running into fire for even if you don't come back. I can't undo what I did, Derek continued, addressing Samuel directly now. I can't give you back the dignity I tried to take from you that day, but I can promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor my uncle's sacrifice by becoming someone worthy of the grace you've shown me, by helping others the way you've helped me, by running toward people with open hands instead of closed fists. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including Marcus's. He'd fought this mentorship initially, certain it was his father being taken advantage of, certain Derek was manipulating a kind man's better nature. But over the past months, watching Derek show up day after day, seeing genuine change take root, Marcus had slowly let go of his anger and accepted that redemption was possible, even for someone like Derek Hutchins. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared stories about Danny Hutchins gathered from old unit members who'd made the trip, Derek found himself standing with Michael Hutchins, his father, who'd shown up unexpected and uninvited. I saw the video, Michael said gruffly. He looked older than his 68 years, worn down by decades of drinking and bitterness. Of you apologizing, and this thing today. Dad, Derek began, but Michael held up his hand. Let me finish. I was wrong. About a lot of things. I taught you wrong. Raised you to be angry like me, to see the world as something you had to fight against. But Danny wasn't like that. He was good, kind, and I couldn't stand it after he died. Couldn't stand knowing that the good one was gone and I was still here. Michael's voice broke. So I made sure you turned out like me instead of him. Made sure you learned anger instead of kindness. And I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry I gave you that inheritance instead of telling you about your uncle, about who he really was. Derek looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw not the monster of his childhood, but a broken man who'd never learned to process his own pain. It didn't excuse what Michael had done, but it helped Derek understand it. Dad, Derek said carefully, I'm in therapy, learning how to deal with anger without hurting people. Maybe you could come with me sometime. Talk to Dr. Williams? Michael was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe I could do that. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was a beginning, which was all anyone could really ask for. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Samuel found Derek standing in front of Danny's photograph again. You okay? Samuel asked. I'm thinking about circles again, Derek said. You talked about breaking the cycle of violence. But there's another circle, isn't there? The circle of sacrifice and grace. My uncle sacrificed himself to save you. You extended grace to me. Now I get to extend that same grace to others. The circle keeps going, but instead of passing on pain, we're passing on redemption. Samuel smiled. You've learned well, Derek. Better than I expected, honestly. I had a good teacher, Derek replied. Then, hesitantly, Mr. Washington, I know I've finished my community service hours. And I know the court case is closed, but can I keep coming? Keep volunteering here? Keep learning from you? I was hoping you'd ask that, Samuel said. Because there's a lot more work to do. A lot more young men who need to hear your story. A lot more opportunities to honor your uncle's sacrifice by helping others. Then I'll be here, Derek promised. For as long as you'll have me. 3 years later, Derek Hutchins stood in front of a classroom at a community college, teaching a course on conflict resolution and restorative justice. He was 35 pounds lighter than he'd been the day he assaulted Samuel Washington, with lines around his eyes that came from smiling instead of scowling. He'd gotten his GED, completed an associate's degree in social work, and was working toward his bachelor's. On his desk sat 2 photographs. One was of his Uncle Danny in his uniform, young and proud. The other was of Derek with Samuel at the Veterans Center, both of them laughing at something only they understood. "Before we start today," Derek told his students, "I want to tell you a story about the worst thing I ever did and the best thing that ever happened to me." And he did. Every time he taught the class, he told the truth about the assault, the arrest, the viral video, the consequences. About Samuel's grace and Danny's sacrifice and the long, hard work of becoming someone different. Some students were skeptical. Some were moved. All of them listened. Samuel still came to some of Derek's talks, sitting in the back row, watching his protege with quiet pride. At 75, he'd slowed down a bit, but he still volunteered at the Veterans Center 3 days a week. Still mentored young men who needed guidance. Still chose grace over bitterness, even when bitterness would have been easier. Marcus had written a book about his father's experience, donating all proceeds to veterans' charities and conflict resolution programs. The slap heard round the world, one man's journey from victim to healer, had become required reading in several criminal justice programs around the country. Dorothy still worried about her husband, still marveled at his capacity for forgiveness, still stood beside him through everything. And sometimes, late at night, Samuel would tell her about his dreams where Danny Hutchins was alive again, smiling, saying, "You did good with my nephew, Sam. You did real good." The video that had gone viral all those years ago still existed online, of course. Over 10 million views now. But it had been joined by other videos of Derek and Samuel speaking together at schools, videos of Derek's TEDx talk about redemption, videos of the ceremony honoring Danny Hutchins. The story had changed from one of violence and hatred to one of transformation and grace. It had become proof that people could change, that cycles could be broken, that the worst moments of our lives didn't have to define us forever. And on Veterans Day, Derek always visited 2 graves in Arlington National Cemetery. First, his Uncle Danny's, where he'd place a flag and sit for a while, telling his uncle about the man he was becoming. Then he'd walk across the cemetery to where Samuel would eventually be buried. The plot had already been purchased beside Dorothy's future resting place, and he'd sit there too, practicing the eulogy he hoped he'd never have to give. "Thank you," he'd whisper to the empty space. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. Thank you for showing me what my uncle's sacrifice actually meant. Thank you for breaking the cycle." The slap that had echoed through that grocery store had set off ripples that were still spreading outward, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. It had exposed the worst in Derek Hutchins and brought out the best in Samuel Washington. It had revealed the hidden connections that bind strangers together and proven that grace was more powerful than revenge. Most importantly, it had shown that the answer to, "What kind of person am I?" was never fixed, never permanent. Every day offered a new chance to answer that question differently, to choose who you wanted to be instead of accepting who you'd always been. Derek Hutchins had been a bully, a racist, a violent man who hurt others without thought or care. But that wasn't who he was anymore. Every day, through every choice, through every person he helped instead of hurt, he answered that question again. "I am someone who's trying to be better. I am someone who honors my uncle's sacrifice. I am someone who deserves the grace I was given." And Samuel Washington, who could have chosen hatred or revenge or simple indifference, had instead chosen the hardest path, the path of redemption for both himself and his attacker. In doing so, he'd honored not just Danny Hutchins' sacrifice, but every person who'd ever chosen grace over violence, forgiveness over bitterness, hope over despair. The grocery store where it all began eventually put up a small plaque near the cereal aisle where Samuel had stumbled backward from that slap. It read, "On this spot, April 2023, a moment of violence became a story of redemption. May all who pass here choose grace over anger, understanding over judgment, and hope over hate. And every year on the anniversary of the assault, Derek and Samuel would meet at that spot, shake hands, and renew their commitment to the work they'd been doing together, breaking cycles, healing wounds, proving that the worst moment of someone's life could become the catalyst for their best work. The slap had been heard around the world, but the handshake that followed had been felt in every heart that had ever believed in second chances, in every soul that had ever hoped that people could change, in every life that had been touched by the transformative power of grace, offered in the face of undeserved hatred. That handshake was still echoing years later, growing louder with every person it inspired to choose differently, to be better, to believe in redemption. And it all started with an old man who refused to let hate win, and a young man who finally learned what real strength looked like. If this story touched your heart, ask yourself, when faced with injustice, do you choose revenge or redemption? When confronted with your own mistakes, do you defend them or learn from them? The choice between anger and grace is one we all face every single day. Which circle will you perpetuate, the cycle of violence or the cycle of healing? Samuel and Derek's story proves that it's never too late to break the cycle. It's never too late to become someone better. It's never too late to choose grace. What will you choose today?